titled An Ordinary Journey, Student Self-Formation at Lower-Tier Higher Education Institutions in China. And allow me to introduce our guests who are going to share their work with us today. So we have Xie An, who is our presenter today. So Xie An is a PhD candidate in the Department of Education, Oxford University. Her research focuses on higher education, institutional stratification, student experience and mobility, and equity in higher education. And our discussant is Dr. Kurawone Sungo from the University of Free State. So this is how the session is going to be structured. So Xie An, you have 30 minutes to share your work with us. Thereafter, I'll hand over to Kura, who is our discussant. He will have 10 minutes, and then I'll open the floor for questions for Q&A session. And before I hand over to Xie An, so I'll just ask the colleagues online to just mute themselves. So we'll only unmute if during the Q&A session. If you have a question, then you can just lift up your hand and unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, over to you, Xie An. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Arina, and thank you, the SARChI-HEHD research group, for inviting me. And good afternoon, everyone in the room and also online. I'm Xie An, and thanks for the introduction. And today I'm going to share some parts of my PhD research. I just submitted my thesis, and I'm excited about my defense, but my viva in mid-June. So today I'm very excited about taking this opportunity to share my research, and I'm also very excited to hearing about your feedback, questions, and any comments. So this part of the thank you, Melanin. So today's research originated from my PhD thesis, titled An Ordinary Journey, Self-Student Formation at Lower-Tier Higher Education Institutions in China. This research is focuses on students coming from marginalized rural backgrounds and their trajectories navigating educational spaces, particularly in higher education. Before moving on to my research, I have to admit and I'll also apologize for my unfamiliarity with the South African or African context. So, but I'd really like to hear about your comments and insights on how different systems of higher education vary and also share similarities, and would also be very happy to learn from each other. So let me move my slides. So today the presentation, I would mainly talk about the research, the background and why I wanted to do this research. And I want to share two major findings. The first is an ordinary self, and the second is a hopeful self. And I will get into that shortly. So about the research, so as I mentioned, this research is about marginalized rural students and their trajectories navigating educational spaces, particularly in the lower tier higher education institutions in China. And before I started my PhD, I had a few experiences of working with rural communities and rural youth in China, and my observation my experiences working them kind of taught me about the kind of structural inequality of accessing education, and also how their trajectories would expand, and if they want to pursue higher education. And in China, I'm not very familiar with the African context, but in China, education, especially higher education, is if not the only, but one of the very, very few way for upward mobility, especially higher education is seen as the pathway with the best clarity and also structure. There's abundant resources available at the society level. Of course, there's a lot of disparities in what kind of schools are available in rural areas and in urban areas, but higher education or education in general is seen as the best way for social mobility. And also looking at poor rural students, while looking at poor rural students and also studying at lower tier institutions, the reason behind this choice was to understand how opportunities, access, participation, and outcomes are structured, and also their agency navigating in these systems. Maybe some of you are already familiar with literature in this field. A lot of the research focuses on marginalized students or first generation students going into higher education, but most of them focus on elite institutions. But the reason behind me choosing lower tier institutions is I wanted to understand a more holistic picture of higher education system, because elite institutions are just a very small fraction of the Chinese, the massive higher education system. And then I also wanted to look at how these dynamics of power between students, society, higher education institutions, and also the state embody the larger social, cultural, and political narratives between these different stakeholders. So the kind of the central argument, the central inquiry of this study lies in understanding the formation of the self. I will come into that a bit later. When navigating the complexity of structured inequalities, marginalization, and multiple forces, especially in neoliberal ideologies and norms, and also state agendas in creating kind of a collective agenda for development and modernization. The inquiry not only demands a critical understanding of the daily experiences lived by these students, but also aims to construct how effective and relational experiences with forces of power in return shape or are shaped by their ongoing process of self-formation. So a bit of background, the methodological design. So this is it's a narrative-based inquiry, and I conducted my research in 3 different lower tier higher education institutions in China. So how we define lower tier colleges? Well, we call them colleges. So these are institutions that grant 4-year bachelor degrees in China, but they like in Chinese we call them 学院. The English equivalent would be colleges instead of university. The status of colleges is seen as like culture and socially lower than the status of a university, but they are also seen like terminology wise, they're also part of this higher education system. It's just I'll come to that slide later. And sorry, and they're ranked around 300 to 400 in the national ranking. And at each institution, I recruited 12 to 14 students, and I worked with them across an entire academic year. And they come from different disciplines and years of study. And I also try to balance the kind of gender ratio in my research. So I have 37 individual student cases in total, and I worked with them in both in informal and formal kind of occasions. I sometimes hang out with them and doing a little bit of like ethnographic research, but I had 3 rounds of more formal data collection. So firstly, I did a round of autobiography, trying to understand their life trajectories, where they came from, and their kind of mobility journey, moving from the rural village to the township for high school, and then moving to a bigger city for higher education. And based on their autobiography, their life trajectories, I did 2 rounds of sequential interviews to try to unpack more their life trajectories, and especially focusing on their experiences in higher education. For example, why they wanted to pursue a degree, and the kind of experiences that they had in the college, things they enjoy, academic experience, social experience, and also their anticipations or plans for the future. So the later I will mention a lot of quotes, and all the names are pseudonymized. So this is what I wanted to say about the how I define lower tier institutions. So the Chinese higher education system is massive. If we're talking about tertiary education system, there's around 2,700 institutions. But if we're talking about institutions that grant 4-year bachelor degrees, we have, this is based on the 2022 statistics, there's almost 850 institutions that give these institutions, and this number is still growing. So among these, this is probably not the size of these circles, probably not presented in a kind of ratio-wise way, because so the first tier universities, those 200 plus, they are seen as, let's say, good universities. So if you have the access to one of those universities, in general, people would consider you as, let's say, smart. And among these 200, those Project 985 or Project 111, these are seen as the most prestigious universities, and those smartest students, they get into those universities. But outside of these, let's say, outside of these first year universities, outside of these 200, there's this social cultural stigma against those who couldn't make into those more prestigious universities, and I'll unpack that later. So the kind of institutions I focus on is around 300 to 400 in the national ranking. So outside of these first year universities, that's why I call them lower tier institutions. So I used an intentional bricolage of interdisciplinary theories because, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of studies in this research space focusing on elite spaces, like poor students or rural students going to top higher education institutions, and the use of Bourdieu theories. But the popularity of this strand of research has also obscured the rest of the higher education system, in which top universities and institutions remain only a fraction. So if we want to develop a better understanding of how access, participation, and outcome of marginalized students, we need to get a better or a much more holistic picture of the rest of the system. So in the following, I will present pieces of findings from my thesis, and in the meantime, I will also share you some stories that I observed, and also kind of re-narrated from my perspective, so through the perspectives of my participants. And this is also like the core design of my research. So the first part, I want to share you the sense of being ordinary, the ordinary self. This is one of the foundations of the key arguments of my research. And before moving on to more analytical findings, I will present you with a story. Pearl Du, it's a pseudonym of one of my participants, was a female final year student of humanities at Ocean College. When we first met, she grew up in a single parent family in a rural village in the eastern coastal area of China. On a rainy day when she was 12, her father was driving her along the muddy, slippery countryside road when a car suddenly crashed into them. Her father tragically lost his life in this accident, and she was seriously injured and had to be suspended from school for a year. Since then, her family has faced financial burdens. Pearl had been an average student throughout her educational journey. She seemed content yet conflicted about being average. From the bottom of her heart, she seemed to want something more. On the other hand, living up to an average standard would require less demanding effort, and with such modest expectations, she could also avoid disappointing herself or her family. She once said, I feel like I should stay in the middle tier and just make sure that I don't slip below that. Through hard work, interest in learning, resilience, and family support, she became the first person to go to higher education in her family, who expected her to become a public school teacher. It is a very stable job, and she could make a decent living from it. However, no one in the family had ever been a teacher, so she had to figure out her own way out. Life at Ocean College, this is one of my main research sites, was peaceful. There was not as much disruption as in her early years. She spent substantial time in her third and fourth years preparing for the exams for selecting teachers at regional public schools. She lined up in front of the campus library every morning before it opened at 8, just to make sure that she could secure a spot with a power socket to charge her old laptop and spend her entire day preparing for the exams. In December 2022, she told me about an important exam she was planning to take, but was very sure that she was only taking it for practice and had no hope of actually getting a job. She was actually booking her return ticket to go home after the written test. Just at this moment, someone from the school texted her, asking her to stay for another day for an interview. She didn't believe it at first and checked multiple times to confirm whether the message could be a scam. Later, she passed the interview and successfully secured a job at one of the regional public schools, a dream job she and her family had aspired to. When reflecting on this process, she emphasized multiple times to me, if there had been more candidates, it definitely wouldn't have been me. She believed that it would have been those who were studying at a better university, with better abilities, who seemed more confident, with better family connections. But it could never have been her. She didn't attribute this success much to her hard work, perseverance, and abilities. She said it was luck, 90% luck. Produce sense of the self, or more precisely, the way she was influenced to see herself, underlines the first main finding I want to present here. The exact word 普通 in Chinese, meaning ordinary or common, frequently occurred throughout the research process. Out of the 37 participants, 24 directly used the word on various occasions related to how they perceive themselves or were perceived by others. Putong was often used to associate with their rural identity, their family background, their grades, the status of their class in high school, the status of their college, and the way they perceived themselves in relation to others. For example, students mentioned, I am a Putong person. I was put into a Putong class. I was born in a Putong rural family, and I studied at a Putong lower tier college. It suggests a sense of being average and a sense of the self being plain, as not standing out or being remarkable. Despite that being ordinary might be a universal state of being, we're all ordinary people. But the way these students used this word indicates another layer of meaning that has some more social, logical significance. Let's look at these two quotes. But I'm always confused. I don't know how to tell those who have hopes for me that I'm very putong and I might not be able to find a job. And during my interaction with another participant called Velvet Breeze, um, his friends used the word humble to describe him, but he responded to me, the word humble feels too far from me. There are too many outstanding people, and I'm just a Putong student from a lower tier college. I can't be described as outstanding in any way. I really do feel low, indeed very low. So low is a kind of a adjective some like young people use to to describe themselves as not being remarkable or standing out. So the use of putong or being ordinary also implies the state of being stuck in between, which is also seen as sometimes undesirable. This is another quote from this is a quote from another participant called Ruby Elegance. I feel like I'm the kind of person who's neither here nor there, probably slightly above average, not good enough, but not too bad. My academic performance was like that too. So he talked about his kind of ranking throughout these educational experiences. And then he said, I'm never the strongest. There are always people who are somewhat better than I am, so I can't break through. So he also talked about kind of his, I don't know, his rankings or his competitiveness in various kinds of in sports, academic performances. So he feel like maybe in all aspects, I give people the impression that I'm just hanging on at the lower tier. So this kind of the way these students they feel themselves, this is a very complex um, um, it's coupled with how they see themselves positioned in competitions like schools, classes, and in their college entrance exams, and also in a kind of standing of their institutional ranking. When commenting on their university experiences, participants like Ruby Elegance shared how studying at lower tier institutions created a sense of dilemma. This perceived sense of being ordinary, as Ruby Elegance put it, neither here nor there, is not good enough to excel, but not bad enough to fail. So this kind of dilemma, they're in the higher education system, they have the access, but they don't stand out too much. This is often linked to their ongoing self-positioning, a reflexive, realistic evaluation, and the realization of their relative status in the social and institutional hierarchies. And another aspect, one thing I want to emphasize here about this sense of being ordinary is the characteristics of this sense of the self, is this paradoxical nature. It's a relative privilege. In other words, it indicates the coexistence of privilege and marginality. It is worth noting that the sense of being ordinary requires efforts to achieve and maintain. The perceived ordinary self, counterintuitively, also requires significant efforts, resources, commitment, and chance from these students from marginalized backgrounds. Everyone was at school, but not everyone had made it all the way to higher education like they did. Gaining access to higher education was not an easy journey, and students worked diligently to reach this achievement. Their degree has earned them and their family respect in their village and communities, where a degree remains highly valued and relatively scarce. Yet there lies a profound structure behind such seemingly uplifting privilege for the poor, which cannot be celebrated too soon. As shown earlier, this privilege is relative. Despite their admission to higher education bringing pride, this affect is also coupled with complexity. Unlike those who have made it to prestigious high ranking universities, the substance of the degree is at a crossroads. Let's look at these two quotes. So this is quotes from these are quotes from Purple Reverie and also and Floating Petals. So for Purple Reverie, he mentioned like he felt being an ordinary college student, and I probed what do you mean by being ordinary, and he mentioned there are just so many college students nowadays. It just feels like being one among the masses. And for Floating Petals, um, she also felt this sense of being ordinary, and when we talked about her plan for the future, she mentioned about she wanted to um, pursue a postgraduate degree because she felt like quote, I am from an ordinary, non-prestigious university. It's not even a good lower tier one. It's like among the already common, I'm on the weaker side. That's why I want to improve myself through a postgraduate degree, unquote. So this is the way that she wanted to figure out how she could overcome this dilemma of being ordinary, having this paradoxical, this coexistence of privilege and marginality, and how to overcome this cultural perception of her institutional status being, let's say, not prestigious. So these students could neither place too much value on their lower tier degree, nor completely dismiss it. This disparity in the perceived value of a degree between their local context, like their families and their own communities, value these degrees a lot. But on the broader side, in the broader social cultural landscape, the coexistence of privilege and marginality has created ambivalence and paradoxes for these educated rural youth. Another aspect I want to mention about the sense of being ordinary is its temporality. So I don't have the time to mention here, but this sense of being ordinary doesn't come into shape overnight. It's a gradual process from their educational experiences from primary school, middle school, that they encountered a lot of ranking, competition, and stress, going through various rounds of selection, and then they ended up in higher education. So the ordinary self not only encompasses the momentous, banal, everyday life of a person, but also indicates the deliberate tracing of one's past and speculating about one's future. The student's sense of ordinariness is shaped over time through their interactions with a world that is often structured by differentiation, hierarchies, segmentation, and othering. This process unfolds through experiences shaped by the urban-rural divide, the education system, higher education, and the job market, which covers various phases of students' life trajectories. The sense of ordinariness is seen as carrying continuity. Once deemed ordinary, it is likely to remain ordinary. For instance, Moonlight Reflection, after joining a prestigious 985 Project University, after following his success in the postgraduate entrance exam, rarely encountered peers with a similar undergraduate background. He also faced overt judgment about his first degree and capabilities. For example, he once mentioned to me about this anecdote he experienced on campus. So he went to an English speaking test, and he ended up chatting with a guy who came from the same city that he's from. So this guy asked him which university he was from, and he said a lower tier college. Then this guy was really shocked and said, "For someone from a lower tier college to get this far, meaning that coming to this prestigious 985 Project University, it proves that your intelligence is still really good." Ha 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 ha. So he was really shocked by this overt discrimination, and he was really angry by the way he was, treated and also discriminated. What I wanted to, what can we kind of interpret from this anecdote was the sense of ordinariness also stretches into the future. Um, it's seen as it's not only about what you achieve now, it's also about what you have done in the past. The kind of this discrimination against your first degree um, carries with you even when you when manage to go to a more prestigious space like the university Moonlight Reflection was studying at. So the sense of ordinariness stretches into the future, and its opposite, for example, floating pedal, she was searching for a postgraduate degree that carries more prestige, um, is envisioned by many as futurity, embodied in gaining admission to a more prestigious university or earning a postgraduate degree. as shown in those previous quotes. No one seems to escape the temporal sense of being ordinary, not even those considered understanding students at these institutions like Moonlit Reflection. The record of attending a lower tier college becomes a notable mark in their autobiography, impossible to erase and continues to affect both their present and their future. This is also evident in the disadvantages students face in postgraduate entrance exams, the discrimination they encounter in the job market, and the discursive marginality directed towards them. Continuously, these students construct, layer, and also enrich and refine the understanding of the ordinary self, trying to figure out where they stand in social and institutional hierarchies. And the second part I want to present here, I may not have enough time to go through all the content I prepared, but so the second part is about how students navigate their future. And before that, I also want to share another story. In 2022, there were 10.76 million university graduates and almost 4.5 million candidates registered for the postgraduate entrance exam. In 2023, the number of university graduates rose to 11.58 million and 4.7 million registered for the exam, with almost 50% being repeat candidates. Regardless of one's gender, discipline, year of study, or institution, the most popular option among the participants for the graduate outcome was to take the the postgraduate entrance exam, with 21 out of my 37 participants expressing a preference for pursuing a postgraduate degree at some stage during their university life. And Willow Whisper was one of them. Like most of my participants, she was one of the first in her family to attend university, a milestone that filled her parents with pride. She worked hard the at college, not only because of her parents nagging, but also because she wanted to build a stronger profile, one better than what she had now, to secure a decent job after graduation. Her perception was influenced by peer conversations, social media narratives, stories shared among friends and family, and was further reinforced by official employment statistics, indicating that a degree from a college like hers was insufficient. She needed to work hard to ensure that she would have a better prospect to stand up among the tens of millions of graduates once she finished her degree. Life at the college was largely enjoyable. She made some new friends, enjoyed her coursework in urban planning, and felt satisfied with her small everyday learning in her studies. The decision to pursue a degree in urban planning had been recommended by a family member who worked as a graphic designer, assuming the two fields were closely related. While there are some similarities, no one reminded them about the significant differences between the disciplines, as well as the change in job prospects in the respective industries. By the time she started her degree, the field of urban planning had already began to stagnate, with the industry shrinking significantly due to an economic shift toward new and rapidly expanding industries. She became gradually aware of the limited job opportunities, harsh working conditions, the stagnation with the industry, and the troubling discrimination against women in the field. With credential inflation, it only becomes more competitive and challenging to find a decent job in this area with an undergraduate degree from a lower tier institution. Many urban planning and designing companies only hire those with postgraduate degrees. And on top of this, she heard from senior peers and faculty members that many employers prefer to hire men over women. Facing this situation, she wasn't sure what she could do with her degree and then made up her mind to prepare for the postgraduate entrance exam. The decision gave her more hope for the future, but she was concerned about the cost of preparation, the cost of tuition fees for the degree, and whether she would be able to succeed the exam the first time. If not, whether she could afford a second attempt. It is always a hard decision to make for many of my participants. weighing both the cost of their goal and the likelihood and benefits of achieving it. But she firmly believed that at this stage, what she could do was to work hard to improve her chances of standing out in the exam and gaining admission. I thought she could get in because she worked so hard and meticulously in her work, but unfortunately she didn't. She explained it was unlucky that the university she aimed for received more applications that particular year, and as a consequence, the entrance threshold got increased. Although deeply disappointed, she still wanted to attempt the exam a second time, targeting another university. She stayed home after graduation to focus on preparing for the exam full time. This was the last chance she gave herself. If she couldn't succeed this time, her only option would be to find a job and take whatever opportunity came her way. So now I present the hope for self that stretches into the future, particularly how these students' anticipation, disillusionment, and hope are woven together as they navigate their path into the future, as demonstrated in Willow Whisper's story. The formation of a helpful self originates from how the students navigate their graduate outcomes. And the most popular paths, for example, taking the postgraduate entrance exam or taking civil servant exams to become to get a permanent job in the government. I don't have the time to go into many details here, but I want to emphasize that the process of figuring out graduate comms can be enabling because it gives students a sense of orientation, purpose, and hope, and so that they can plan their time in university and work towards that goal. At the same time, given the low success rate and cost of popular paths, uncertainty, risks, and possibility of failure persist, all of which contribute to concerns, stress, anxiety. The journey marked by affective complexity is not just related to the historically high unemployment rate, but also the structural and explicit othering against their lower tier degrees. Many students share with me their experiences encountering deliberate discriminations and even hostility, which made them feel uncomfortable, anxious, and angry. So this is some quotes from experiences from Starry Night and Willow Whisper, and they said about when you go out to many companies, a lot of them will definitely look at your degree, and they might just filter you out right away if you see you have a lower tier degree. And also, Willow Whisper told me in the graduate entrance exam, there are two rounds, and the second round is an interview, and in that process, there's a lot of things can be manipulated. So for people like those who have a lower tier degree, and they might face some discrimination against themselves, and leading to a lower chance of getting to the postgraduate program, even if they already passed the threshold for the first round of the kind of standard exam. So faced with this kind of economic decline, increasing unemployment, and overt discrimination against their academic backgrounds, these students realized they were in a difficult situation, uncertain about their chances of securing favorable graduate outcomes and a stable future. When facing these concerns, stress, anxiety, and disillusionment, and the possibility of not finding a graduate level job, many students tended to resort to self-reliance and autonomy. The emphasis on self-reliance and autonomy, that the idea that one should shape their own future regardless of circumstances, was very clear in the ways they responded to these challenges. Their life experience has already made them firmly believe that there's no one supporting them at their back, and they can only rely on themselves to pave their way for the better future. The upbringing of a neoliberal South does not just emerge from structural inequality that marginalizes students, but also reinforced by the state-steered ideologies to shed off collective responsibilities and urge individuals to strive forward. I don't have the time to tell you the exact story happened, but in short, was students, they kind of had some online activism, complaining about the high unemployment rate. and then I think it's the youth league of the party um, responded to that activism and requiring students to work hard and also accept non-graduate jobs, because only hard work and resilience can build them a better future. So these kind of ideologies are also demonstrated in teachings and guidance at institutional level. For example, the motto of one institution: apart from striving, there is no other choice. This kind of motto or narrative form a more immediate influence to urge students to work harder, and given the lack of other choices. So I have some more quotes, but this is more like students' criticism against the dominant narratives, urging them to work harder despite of circumstances. But they also see it as a exploitation of their efforts, of their time. So I wanted to end my presentation by interpreting this mixture of affect. For example, the disillusionment, concern, and hope reflects a complex and interwoven educational and sociological issue. Inside Out, it concerns higher education massification, credential inflation, and stratification, while also concerning wider social, economic, and political issues around economic stagnation, social segmentation, neoliberalism, and deep inequalities. Following these findings in my thesis, I also proceed to analyze students' strategies as to how they continue to wait, invest, and stay hope in the face of disillusionment and complaints about the gap between their expectations and the return of a degree and reality. This because this is a very interesting story. Despite this kind of disillusionment and low success rate, there's always stories about their friends or friends of their friends who succeeded in these very competitive exams or these job applications. And these kind of stories exemplify the dim chance of success and raise a more pressing question that puts many of these students and also my participants into an internal trial of constant scrutiny, self-questioning, and even self-blame. Why are they able to achieve it, but I am not? This has also led to many of them continuing the process of waiting, investing, and staying hopeful. Based on the above, I presented some pieces of my findings from my thesis. This may be a little bit fragmented, and I'm also trying to learn how to kind of abstract things from this bunky thesis. So I presented the formation of an ordinary self and the hopeful self, and how these two interact based on the students' ongoing evaluation of their positioning in social and institutional hierarchies, and how they navigate their future. In addition to these, my thesis also dedicated a big part analyzing student various forms of agency, responding to and acting on these structural challenges in everyday life. And in conclusion, I also um, argued that higher education has become an imagined life trajectory that shapes these students' aspirations and their and also their agency, and also their relationships with different forces of power, and also how they see time, how past, present, and future are connected with each other. So I guess I will probably just stop here. And I really looking forward to comments and feedback and questions. And thank you. Sorry for yeah, spending more time on this presentation.
Thank you very much, Xie, for such an insightful presentation. So now I'll hand over to our discussant. Over to you, Dr. Kula.
Okay, thank you very much, Karina. Thank you very much, Xie, for the presentation. Quite interesting, just getting an idea of the higher education landscape in China and how students, their experiences, student experience in higher education in China. So the presentation was quite interesting. So what I will do for the sake of time, I will just go into my reflections. I realized that you used quite a number of theories. I just wanted to find out how those theories and how you used those theories in your analysis of data that you gathered, and whether those things whether there was any how they were complementing each other. Theories, how are they complementing each other, or you actually treat them as separate? And then you also mentioned something to do with neoliberalism. I just wanted to find out how it manifests itself within the lower tier higher education institutions in China. And then we also spoke of the issue of agency. I wanted to find out how these students demonstrated agency, the role of agency, given that their experience or their education, the kind of education that they are receiving is regarded as lower tier, it's not regarded as prestigious. And then how then do they demonstrate, or how okay, was there any sign of agency on the part of the students in terms of maneuvering or in terms of finding themselves out of the situation or the predicament? And then the other thing is, what sort of institutional structures are there in those lower tier institutions that support or prepare students for life after education, given that the institutions are regarded as lower tier? And then another issue was whether the students have got any voice or whether they've got any say in terms of issues related to enhancing their experience within the education space as well. And then the other question goes back to your methodology where you used autobiographies, given that in some cases autobiographies have been criticized as either leaning towards negativity or the positivity or going to the extremes. And then you complemented the autobiography part of it with interviews. I just wanted to find out, did you by any chance consider having or interviewing or engaging other stakeholders within those lower tier institutions? So I think I'll end.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kura, for that. I will give Xie An time before opening the floor for Q&A. I'll give Xie An time to respond to Dr. Kura's questions. I noticed he raised quite a few questions. So yeah, over to you, Xie An. And if you need him to repeat some of the questions, you just let us know. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kura, for your questions. So these are the questions that I've been keeping reflecting on in this PhD journey. So the first one, how I use my theories, and there's quite a few of them. So I think a more like a transparent answer would be, I think I started my research. I'm not saying it's a grounded theory research, but I started my research with a very loose theoretical framework. And this is more of an inductive research. So I had all these stories and I analyzed them and interpreted them. And then I searched for tools, theories that I find they speak to the voices of my participants. So I didn't have a framework that kind of try to feed the voices into those I don't know categories or whatever. But I wanted to maybe amplify the voices of these students, like what are the kind of theories or interpretive tools that speak better to their experiences, their narratives. So higher education as self-formation, I think this is more of a like the way I see higher education, but I also problematize Martinson's theory as seeing higher education as assume the positive experience. I think what I find out from my research is the experience or the self-formation is ambivalent. There's a lot of dynamics and differences and this affect complexity involved in the self-formation journey. And Scott's everyday forms of resistance. I think this theory helped me to understand, looking at these daily practices of agency, and this also responds to our another question about agency, and also bringing to neoliberalism. I used the Han's theory on psychopolitics, seeing individual agency works not only against structure but also with and within. So you see the students, their degree are discriminated or kind of marginalized by this structural system, but they also want to get involved. They pursue their future within the system. They're not, let's say, not trying to really fight against with it. They don't want a very heroic form. They don't want something that's really loud. They try to how to say, they try to gain their own benefits or pave their own a better future by I'm not saying conforming, but by ways of not knowing. So the second, sorry, I'm a little bit messy here, but another argument in my thesis was I conceptualized student agency as drifting as in they're drifting in terms of whether I want to conform or comply to structure, or how can I work, have my own space to not conforming to a neoliberal idea or ideologies or the neoliberal self. So I don't know if that makes sense here, but for example, students, they try to fit in, and they also try to maybe try to develop their own space of not conforming to, but it's very difficult. So they're drifting between whether to conform or not. So this kind of momentous, these moments of pause, confusion and loss, and also moments of, trying to drift, but also coming back and then going away. So this kind of uncertainty, I see that as their everyday forms of resistance. Maybe they're not very, let's say, obvious or not very as heroic as we see, I don't know, but they are the ways that they of these marginalized students they can practice. And institutional support. I don't know if I understand your question correctly, but I think at this stage, for these students, they can rely on institutional support. And I have also one chapter, one section on how students try to fit in or use institutional standard to stand out, so become the star on campus. But this also raises another question about being thriving locally and also being seen as ordinary in a larger social cultural context. And also their institution, because their modest ranking and also the lack of resources, and may not really let's say I think maybe for these institutions, one thing that they could do is to improve the teaching and learning, because at the institution, these kind of institutions, um, teaching and learning, sometimes from students' perspective, it's not they don't find it very satisfying. So if the learning and teaching could be improved, I didn't mention in my presentation today, but at least they can learn more knowledge and skill that can better prepare themselves with some more competition in the future. And the methodology part, autobiography, and did I consider other stakeholders? So I did my research in a kind of worst COVID situations in China, when the country had the most the kind of most strict travel restrictions. So going into the universities and having access to that was already a little bit difficult, and I was faced with kind of time constraint. So I was deciding between whether I should go deeper into these students' stories or whether I should include more stakeholders. But I choose the former. But I agree with you. If I had included more stakeholders, like the parents, especially the teachers and senior managers at the university, that would have been a better, a more holistic story. But I think that would be a really nice thing for future research to consider. The kind of limitations of autobiography, I agree. But I think there's also other sides of utilizing autobiography in the research was I think a lot of the students, they really enjoy this process. They said this is something that they've never done before, and also help them to kind of revisit their life in writing in a document, so that they were very pleased to have done this process. It's a very reflexive and also enabling process for them. And having the interviews, I think for me, helped with seeing different perspectives and also probing questions instead of, yeah, sometimes autobiography is biased because people present in a way that they want to present. Sorry, I think my answers are pretty long.
Thank you very much for that, Xie An. I think our time allows us to take 2 or 3 more questions. I see Prof. Melanie's hand is up. Prof, you can go ahead.
Thanks very much, Irina. Xie An, thank you for a really interesting presentation, and I'm sure there are many of us that look forward to the book that's going to come out of the work and the various papers which this work lends itself to. I was also going to ask how you used Scott and Margenson, but you've kind of addressed that. Although I think, I mean, I'd be interested to read more of the thesis in which you're particularly developing the ideas from Scott, because I think that's an interesting line of inquiry. So I've got 2 comments and 2 questions. The comments are that I really liked your very poetic pseudonyms. I thought they were really, really beautiful. And the other comment is, I'm not sure about this notion of drifting that you use, because to me it implies a kind of an aimlessness. And from what you're saying, it's not that the students were aimless, but they withdraw, as it were, from the struggle for a bit, and then they reinsert themselves and so on. But again, that's just a comment. So the 2 questions were, what, if any, was the impact of curriculum and pedagogical experiences on this construction of either the ordinary self or the aspirational self? And then the second question was, could something like an aspirational self or an imagined self, although I prefer aspirational self, actually bridge across both groups? Because the ordinary self, the students who saw themselves as ordinary were not without aspirations. I mean, they already are mobile in relation to their parents' situation. So is there not something that could actually both keep these categories intact, because they're extremely interesting, but also look at what might be common across the both of them? But thank you very much. It's a really, really nice piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Is there any question? Colleagues in the room? Okay, Prof, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Irina. Thank you, Xie An. I'm going to add a question, I guess, about the self-formation part, and if there was any recognition by your participants that there are people who are viewing them in a more positive light as a result of being educated. So community members or their family members being able to recognize them as not ordinary, exactly because they've been able to achieve these university degrees. And then I had a question about representation, and if you had any difficulty striking a balance between what you were trying to do in terms of amplifying their voices versus re-narrating their stories in ways that capture your interpretation of their stories more than it does represent how they might want people to perceive their stories. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but it's a question about balancing what you try to do in terms of amplifying versus representing their stories.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mika. Maybe let me give Xie An time to respond, because the questions, if I check the third person, they might end up being a lot. Okay, Xie An, over to you.
Thank you, Rina, and thank you both for the questions and comments. I think I maybe first address Melanie's question and then go to the sorry, I didn't get your name. Yeah, your questions. So the pedagogical implications, I think. So in my research, there's a few cases where students would say that their teachers they get they set up a role model for them, and they create a space for them to learn to engage with in academic conversations. I think that was maybe that was the opportunity. I think that the question is it seems like it's a culture and also institutional norm in those three institutions I worked with. Teaching and learning are not seen as very they're more seen as procedural. So they finish the class, they as professors do the presentation and they do the test and that's it. So if academics say and then there's also who should we blame? Are we blaming the students, or are we blaming the teachers, or are we blaming the institutions? This is more of a structural issue. If we consider resources hierarchies, but I think something that's really can be very simple to start with is maybe institutions can try to focus more on teaching and learning and also assessing, so that students that's the core of education. But sometimes we just take it for granted that it's happening. But in a lot of the cases I've worked with, it is not. And aspirational and imaginative self, I think that's a also very interesting kind of strand of theories or concepts that I can work with. There is one section of my thesis that I tried to interpret the kind of aspirational self, or I conceptualized as the unordinary self. So how students picture themselves as the kind of self they wanted to be, the imaginative self, or so there's also like things about how they can stand out at the institutional level and also the larger society, and about self-formation, and if there's any unordinary cases or kind of cases that don't fit with in my research. There are a few students that they don't consider themselves as ordinary. I think this is so if you look at these few cases, I think these students they have for example, one or two family members that are really supportive in their life trajectories, or they're very into reading. They're very engaging in learning. They develop their critical thinking, so they have this ability and also the knowledge, and also the kind of ability they develop through reading and engaging with, talking with people, and also doing a lot of their own self-initiative projects to develop this ability to criticize what is going on now, and instead of maybe accepting or just going with the flow, if that makes sense to you. And representation and balance. So I think what they might want me to present. So I send my thesis to one of my participants and ask for her feedback. I think we had a lot of conversations, and how to respond to this question. Sorry, I need to think a little bit. I think this ongoing this sense of being ordinary is not just kind of present in my own thesis. And there's a lot of kind of conversations going on social media, students coming from lower tier institutions or those non-prestigious universities. They have very ambivalent sentiment towards the degree. And also they face a very common or shared kind of dilemmas in terms of university experience, graduate outcomes, and also their kind of long-term future plans. So I think maybe there's one part of that that is representative, and there's also another part that I think in a thesis, the kind of self I want to present is always very limited. So there's also a lot of other parts. For example, the diligent self, or the hope, or the, I don't know, the maybe the kind of enjoyable, the social self, the academic self that I were not the focus of my thesis. But I think in this thesis, maybe I didn't manage to present, but I was trying to kind of entangle the power dynamics between why they formed this ordinary self and the hopeful self, and also the drifting self. Maybe the drifting is maybe can put into a question mark into that wording. But what I'm trying to do is not to put the individuals, the students, as like, let's say, like a victim or whatever, but I want to disentangle these power relationships and how they navigate these power relationships, if that makes sense to you and answer your question.
Thank you very much, Xie An. Due to time constraints, I'll ask maybe colleagues to continue and engage with Xie An via emails. Colleagues who have comments and questions, maybe you can email them to Xie An. Thank you very much, Xie An.
And thank you, Arina. Thank you, everyone in the room and also online.
Thanks very much. It's really enjoyable. Thank you.
If you have any more comments or questions and feedback, do email me. I would really welcome them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.